Hey everyone, in this video I want to show you a quick way in which we can take data from an SQL database and then use that data somewhere else. In this example, we'll use that data to create an HTML table, but I'll talk to you on how we can do other things with that data. Let's jump right in. So getting started, we're inside of WayScript and we'll create a new layer. To name my project, I will call this one SQL Data 2 Project and I will create my layer. This will put us into a dev environment where we can start developing our code. Our first step will be to create a connection to our database. There's a few ways that we can do this. I will use Python to do this, and we'll need to make sure that we have the credentials to access our database. To do this in Python, we'll say new file, we'll say something like SQL, and we'll put to HTML since we want our data to be in an HTML format as the output. We'll also go ahead and create a requirements.txt. That way we can add our recs as soon as we import them into our Python file. Let's import those libraries. We'll say import OS. We will import pandas as PD. This will be the library that we will use to convert our SQL data into HTML. And then we will import MySQL.connector. MySQL.connector will allow us to connect to our database. So we have a few lines of code. All this code will be linked down below and also in our GitHub repository. This is what that code looks like. Now for me, I'm exposing my username and my password here, which isn't a best practice, and you probably want to store this in a secrets manager. WayScript has one of those built in that you can use, or you can use your own. I just wanted to show you what these values might look like on your end. So what we're doing here is we're getting the credentials of the database. Depending on where your SQL database is hosted, these will be different. And we'll make sure that all of those values are here. If you need help in finding these values, I have a linked video that shows you how to access these in Heroku. And once we add this, now we can start working with our data. I just want to show you a very simple command. So I will use a very simple statement where I will just select from a table called earnings within my database. From there, what we say is we're creating a cursor. And with that cursor, we can execute our SQL statement. The result will be inside of the cursor where we need to use a method called fetchAll to get all those results. Then we can print those. Once we have all of this, if we want to execute this through a terminal to see the results, we'll go to our requirements and make sure that we have the imports that we need. Those will be these statements here. So pandas and MySQL connector. We will install these by reading this requirements file using pip. So that looks like pip install read requirements.txt. We'll execute this and this will install all of these packages. Once we have that, we can execute our file by saying Python and then the name of our file, which is SQL to HTML.py. Looks like that wasn't saved. So we'll make sure it's saved and try again. And you see that we get all the results from that table printed in the terminal. Now this is cool, but we want to do something with this data. So we'll go back. We no longer need this print statement. And now let's do something with our data. At this point, let's send this over and create an HTML table using pandas, and then we'll display that using an endpoint provided by WayScript. That code looks something like this. If you're unfamiliar with pandas, don't worry. All this code is doing is creating a data frame with a little bit of processing on our results, and then we can use a method called toHTML to create that HTML file. Now, for us, what we'll want to do is if we want to host this using a Flask application, we'll need to make sure that this file is inside of a templates directory. So if you want to alter this code, feel free to. We'll say templates sqldata.html. Then we'll make a new folder, either within your local directory or if you're following along on WayScript. Now that we have that, we will save this and we will execute. Once that finishes, we should now see an HTML file inside of our templates directory, which we do. And now if we want to host this, we'll create a very simple server using Flask. We'll say new file and say app.py. The code for a very simple Flask server that renders that template will look like this. We're introducing one more import. We'll make sure that we add that to our requirements, Flask. Now in app.py, to explain all of this, all we're doing is we're creating a Flask app using the Flask library. Then at the home route, we can change this to whatever we would like. Then we're rendering a template using this function, and that template is within a templates directory by default. sqldata.html. And that's all the code that we need to render this as a Flask application. Finally, to host this with WayScript, there's a few steps. We'll click on this trigger panel. If you don't have it, it is this lightning bolt at the bottom. So make sure that that is open. We'll click on deploy. You see that we're given an endpoint, and this is where our data will live. Our command to run. In our documentation, you can find it there, and it'll also be linked down below in the description. So command to run. Then we match support to our command to run, and we can click test. Once this sets up, we should be able to click this endpoint, and our data should be loaded from the SQL table inside of an HTML table. Now, it might be pretty ugly at first because we're using bare minimal code, but you could imagine that you take this data and do more with it. You can make a nicer table, or you could create an API that serves this data. As you see, our homepage doesn't render anything, but that's because we set this route to be /home. So we'll make sure that we put /home, and now we've rendered this table. So like I said, it's not very pretty, but it does show you a way to get your data outside of an SQL table and to start doing stuff with it. If you have any questions or want to see more about data and how we can move it around, please let us know and we'll be happy to help. Until next time.